Hi. Sorry, I don't know. I'm awkward. Okay. Oh, hey, look, it's Friday. Maybe I'll actually post a video on the day that I said that I would. Um, so I don't know how to introduce this topic, and I don't really know what I'm gonna say, but that's normal for me, so oh well. Um, so I've been thinking a lot lately about um I had this moment as a kid when I went to Ripley's Believe It or Not museum um, in Encinitas. And I say as a kid, I think I was probably at least 12, but, as a preteen. Um, and I always loved that museum for a bunch of reasons, but the main reason I always used to like it is they at the very beginning of the museum, this is the one in Encinitas, they have a one-way mirror, and then at the end of the museum when you walk out you can watch the people looking at themselves in the mirror, which I'm sure sometimes gets awkward, like, I don't know, what if people are like doing whatever, popping a pimple? Probably not, because it's in public, that would be weird, but you know what I mean. If they think they can get away with it, like they might. Anyway. And I had never seen, I don't think I have ever seen a one-way mirror in person, except for that one. Hang on, sorry. But anyway, I wasn't even familiar with the concept until I went there. Sorry, my voice is kind of not working because I hadn't talked yet today, which is also normal for me, I guess. So anyway, uh, the idea of a one-way mirror is really something I think about a lot in a metaphorical sense, because ever since then, or wait, what am I trying to say? Ever since I was a kid, like at that time, even, ever since I was born, basically, I've been a person who thinks in metaphors a lot. It's almost like I've been just like high my whole life, I think. Um, or I don't know, like I have a hyperactive imagination, and I think that's partly maybe just genetic because my birth mom was schizophrenic, and so it's kind of a, you know, they say that like autism develops more often in areas where people are where there are engineering facilities or whatever. I don't know, like cities in Europe. I forget what the study was, but there was a study about like cities in Europe that have higher concentrations of autism, and what they found was that frequently it was like places where people who lived there specifically because there was like a, you know, center for engineering or whatever, and so they thought that like maybe there's, some kind of statistical trend towards that, like where if you have two parents who are highly like logical, like straightforward thinkers like that, then their offspring are more likely to have autism and blah blah blah. And I think they also did a little bit of like there are higher concentrations of schizophrenia in like places where like that attract a lot of artist types and stuff, anyway, I think that's why I read this study, because I throughout my life have done a lot of like term papers on schizophrenia related topics for obvious reasons. Anyway, So basically, you know, like I'm not schizophrenic. I have my moments, but I'm not schizophrenic, but I am somewhere towards the high end of the spectrum in terms of imagination and like metaphorical figurative thinking or whatever, like abstraction from the actual world. Like it's actually kind of hard for me to stay grounded in the real world, especially when I smoke weed, but you know, anyway. So I'm being too honest again. Oh well. This is going to be a real rambly one because it's been a while since I filmed anything, and that's when I usually just poop ideas. Hi. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is even back then, the idea of a one-way mirror, like it's not just like imagining stories where like a one-way mirror could cause, you know, like that's a pretty common trope on especially crime TV shows because that's where else are there one-way mirrors. But for me, metaphor is the main like currency that my brain works in, I think. And so the idea of a one-way mirror pops up for me a lot because what I started thinking about at that time, what I've been preoccupied with ever since. And I remember this moment pretty clearly, like having a thought of like, oh, like maybe, because I've always been preoccupied with the things that I personally don't understand. I'm really sorry for the presentation of this. I think if you're patient, you'll get the gist, which I guess is how it always is, listening to me talk. But anyway, because I have like a learning disability and I don't know what else, like I'm just not neurotypical or whatever. And so I've always felt different and misunderstood, and I've always felt that that there were also a lot of things that I didn't understand about other people and couldn't, like that there was just something that was missing that like I couldn't quite click into. But like the most frustrating thing about it is to know that there's something that you don't understand and not to know what that is. What is that? That's the known unknown or whatever, according to whoever did that. Was it a study or I don't know, some psychology person? Anyway, so there's the known unknown and the unknown unknown. And I guess it kind of works. Well, so the one-way mirror idea is basically just the things you don't know that you don't know, you know, because if you're looking at the mirror, side, and then someone else is looking at the window side, and this is a metaphor for like being in a position where you understand something about someone else that they don't, right? Then it's a metaphor for a lot of things, really. It's a metaphor for not understanding that there's a joke being played on you, you know, like not understanding that there's something that you don't know until the end when you get to the point where you're the one looking through at the other people. But then the question that I think is interesting is how do you behave when you are then on the window side, knowing that there's, you know, being immediately able to empathize with the people who you're looking at because you were just there. But now you're in the position of power, you know, you're the one like looking and laughing at them. And I always thought that was such an interesting thing because it is such a position of like responsibility, I guess. And most people, the immediate reaction is to like point and laugh at the people, who don't even know that they're looking at unless they've been to the museum before. But, and it feels kind of icky when you realize that, that there, people were looking at you if you looked in the mirror, before. Before you knew that it was a one-way, that it was a window on the other side. And that's, I think, a lot of what growing up feels like, is not understanding things. I mean, it works for a lot of things. It's growing up, skill building, like, it's the typical like thing of, if you apply it to YouTube, you look back at your old videos and you're like, oh my God, it was so obvious that I was like jump cutting the shit out of that or whatever. I don't even know if I think I'm too compulsive to stop doing that in some ways, even though I know that it's, whatever, makes you look like an amateur. But anyway, my point is like, there are a million different ways in life that we encounter one-way mirrors. And I think it's worth thinking about quite a bit because, as a person with a learning disability, I tend to be really empathetic towards people who just don't quite understand things. And I think it's important to realize that sometimes when people are behaving badly, maybe even, that it's not always malicious. Sometimes it's ignorance. And I don't know. It's something I think about all the time, honestly, because I do think like, for example, I tweeted recently a picture of like a list of the stages of moral development, and I think there's 6 of them, and level 4 is the level that I think people, a lot of people are at, especially in the US, where you can't get past like it's wrong because it's the law. Or actually, I've read a book, okay, this is going to be something I shouldn't say on camera, and I don't necessarily think that this is an inherently bad thing, but like religion, sometimes the purpose is to fill that gap, I think, where if you're at the stage of moral development where the only kind of morality you can understand is a list of rules, either religion or the law are going to be your go-to thing, or both in some cases, and that's, for you, all there is to morality. And what I wonder about is whether that's just, like we'll accept that that's not a choice and that people don't deserve to be blamed for that if the person has like a mental disability or whatever. But I guess I just wonder how much free will anybody really has, like if they are at a level of moral development that's not quite all the way there. And I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm not trying to make any grand statements or say that we should like not be angry at people who do terrible things, because I think that we should. And I personally have a lot of anger towards a lot of people, and it's not always rational, and sometimes it is. But even with those people, I wonder how much of their action is free, or how much of their belief about themselves and their place in the world and stuff is actually free. Like, I think there's a case to be made, like people who do bad things are frequently people who have also suffered a lot at the hands of other people, like it's a cycle of pain and abuse. And I guess I just I don't know, maybe because I've had that one-way mirror thing in the back of my head since that day. I just think about that a lot in terms of morality, because that's my most recent kind of like preoccupation in life, but also just everything, you know. And I think it is important to be compassionate to people, at least in certain cases, when we recognize those one-way mirrors and recognize. But the key is to remember when you were the person looking at the mirror. You know what I mean? Like, to remember the time that that you were at maybe like a less sophisticated understanding of morality or whatever, and to not be. I think it makes it harder for people to progress when they're being told that they're bad for being the way that they are now, because it can be temporary, but we make it impossible. Like, if you close the door to, you know, the room that has the window in it, and you tell people on the side with the mirror that they're bad and that they're, you know, disgusting, despicable people who deserve bad things and whatever, like the way online discourse is now, that can be pretty problematic, you know, because they're not gonna just disappear. Like, if I don't know, if you want to convince people, you have to leave the door open. Otherwise, what's your plan? Like, are you gonna kill them? Because then that makes you in a tricky position, you know, in terms of moral whatever calculations and stuff. And that's why I think that the whole eat the rich thing, I don't like it. It's not even just that, though. It's like a lot of different things that I don't know. I guess it's just the way we talk to each other that I think is toxic. And I think also, like, if these people, okay, suppose some people who are going down a path of maybe potentially becoming extremists, far-right extremists or whatever, or misogynists or anything like that. Suppose those people okay, yeah, let's use a specific example. So I was not aware until recently of Stefan Molyneux. And the more I learn about him, I haven't watched his actual videos because I really don't like supporting those things by watching the actual video. So I've just been watching Sean's videos about him because he has quite a few. Every clip I have ever seen of him just makes me worried for his mental health. Like, he is a very mentally ill person. And I'm not saying that to make it sound like he's a bad person. I'm saying it because I'm worried that people like that have some really deep traumatic events or traumatic, like, emotional abuse in their past that makes them this way. Like, in Stefan's case, this is wild speculation, and I shouldn't be posting this on the internet, but who cares? My theory so far, from what I've seen, which is not that much, is that his mother was probably very emotionally abusive, and that has led to a lot of hatred of women, but also emotional abuse takes a toll on the brain. Like, it makes your brain work differently. And I, to some extent, can empathize with that because I don't know if I was really emotionally abused. I think I had unhealthy patterns of communication with mostly my sister, who is like a complete sweetheart, and we've had conversations about this since, and I feel really bad now for saying that on the internet, but I don't think she recognizes that it was problematic, but she was also a child at the time. She wasn't my mom, but she was kind of behaving like my mom because I needed that, because I had a learning disability and stuff. But I required a lot more patience growing up than a normal kid would. And so sometimes, she was a child. Like, she didn't have the resources to be patient with me all the time. And also I required a lot from her as a kid growing up. Like, she had to do a lot, pick up a lot of pieces for me, because I would get lost on the way to the bathroom at school, or like forget my backpack places and stuff. Like, she was always there picking up the pieces when I had issues. And so it's not her fault at all, but I do think I had some brain damage from the cycle of learning that beating myself up was the appropriate response to making mistakes. And that can also impact your memory and your ability to form beliefs in the same way that other people do and stuff. And so that led to some weird issues later on. And now I can look back and recognize like some of the actual brain pathways that were happening. And it's actually very similar to the brain pathways that get damaged when you get PTSD. So then, that got exacerbated even more for me later on. But my point is, there are a lot of things that can happen physically in your brain because of emotional events or because of repeated emotional events. And there are a lot of like feedback loops that you can get into. And I think those are really real. And it's important to think about those in physical terms as well, because it's like gravity. Like if everything in your brain is going downhill, like for Stefan Molyneux, that pathway of everything is, it's actually really sad. It's like a conspiracy theory that like women are against you and women are terrible and bad, and like it hurts me to see somebody who's so obviously struggling with delusion, somebody who's so obviously on the mirror side of the one-way mirror. He looks at the mirror and everything he sees is himself and his pain and his delusions about reality that are based on whatever has happened to him in his life. I don't know what it is, or whatever patterns he's in his brain. And when you get into patterns like that, especially if you have a little bit of a, that like bend towards obsessiveness that I clearly do also, like I can see how that happens, like obviously I personally would never go down that path, but I can see how those kinds of things happen. And it sucks because those kinds of people also cause other people a lot of pain, and you want to be able to blame them. But the in some ways, I think the chain of blame is not helpful. And anyway, so it's not that I'm not trying to like make a point about him specifically. My point is mostly just like I think those kinds of things are really worth thinking about, because for me, the main interesting question is, how do you communicate with those kinds of people? Because I'm not a violent person. And I'm, like even Ben Shapiro, like I don't like him. I think he's a grifter. I think he's a bad person, but I'm not going to murder him. So the question then becomes, how do we fix him? Like, you know what I mean? Like or how do we use him as like a way to show other people how not to be that way? You know what I mean? And so, I don't know. I mean, I guess that might be just my specific pathology, but I guess like because I'm not a violent person, like I don't believe in violence because I don't want to personally participate in it, partly because I'm a small person who is not, it's not that I don't think that sometimes violence can be justified. And I realize that there's a place in it, but I personally would just never want to. I would rather die than kill somebody else, just because of my personal dispositions. And so I guess when I like think about these kinds of people, it's like, okay, hating them is one choice. And there are some people who I do hate and I wish I could put behind bars at the very least. But I don't know if I would. There might be one person who I would not be upset if they were no longer in the world. But most of the people who have hurt me most, I would not murder. I wouldn't murder anyone because that's just not who I am. Like anyway, the point is, if you're not willing to either say that somebody deserves to be behind bars, which I don't think the Ben Shapiros of the world deserve to be in jail. They're just awful and I don't like them. And, but I wouldn't physically hurt them. So then the question becomes, how do you engage with their ideas? Like, what do you try to do? Are you trying to persuade them? Are you trying to shame them? Are you trying to, get other people to see the flaws in their ideas so that then they just become irrelevant and, whatever. And I think those are, if you can't change somebody's heart, change their minds and get them on your team, then the only choice you have is to poke at the flaws in their reasoning and show other people why they should not follow that same path. And I think Sean does a really good job of doing that, and that's why I prefer watching his videos to the originals, partly because I think I would get too depressed. But anyway, one-way mirrors, I don't know. I just I think it's worth thinking about that, not only in terms of other people, like trying to recognize when you are in a position where you're seeing through a window that another person sees as a mirror. Because I think that is a moral conundrum that's really worth thinking about. How do you behave when you're just further through the, I picture life as like a tunnel that's just one-way mirrors, and maybe there are a bunch of tunnels and you're going through all of them at once. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you know what I mean? Like I think it's important to not see other people as, to recognize that there really are things that other people can't understand or don't have the resources to understand, or especially when we get like really deep into our own little rabbit holes, it can be really hard to recognize that other people have no idea. Like, Jordan Peterson was supposed to do a debate talking about Marxism, and I can't talk, I haven't read any Marx, but like he had a year to prepare and he only read the one book, reread the one book. Like, you know what I mean? And like, so there are people who just don't have, or, well, in his case, obviously it was willful. Like he could have looked further into it, but I guess he didn't feel that was necessary because he has a pretty big ego. But anyway, the point is, some people just don't have access to the same information. And so when you're in this very specific kind of thing, like it isn't your job to educate people. That's true. But on the other hand, it is your opportunity to, like in the case of trans issues, I think it's important to try and be patient with people, because it is a really hard thing for some people to understand. And that sucks, and it puts you in a position. It's just like any minority, like women get exhausted explaining feminism to men and all of these things. But patience, I think, is key if you're going to actually change people's minds, because yeah, because if you have no point of reference for whatever it is, like, you're not going to come on board unless people give you the opportunity to. Anyway, so I think about that a lot, and I think it's also important to think about it in terms of yourself, and to try and recognize that sometimes when you think that you understand everything and that you're totally on board or whatever, like, you've passed one of the one-way mirrors, but there's always more, I think, is the important thing to recognize. Like, you are always going to be both on the side of the window looking back at other people who are looking at the mirror, and on the side of the mirror in other respects, where other people are looking at you through the window. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons. One, people can take advantage of you really easily if you're on the side of the mirror and you don't know that there's a window on the other side. So, for example, when you're like 19 and like 35-year-old dudes are trying to get in your pants or whatever. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Like, it's especially important to keep an eye out for when you're a young person. But it's also a reason to cut yourself some slack sometimes, I think, because, we're all in the room that we're in. You can't change which room you're in without traveling. Like, there's effort that has to take place to get to a point where you're no longer on the mirror side of whatever specific thing. And so we all have like about 30 mirrors that we're constantly working on getting to the other side of, whether or not we're aware of it, maybe more than 30. I don't know. Anyway, you know what I mean? It's a fun house. I think I've written this in my blog. Fun house full of one-way mirrors. That's how I see life. Anyway, that was quite the ramble, but I don't know. That's kind of all I have to offer the world. So, yeah, that's just kind of brain vomit, I guess. Things I've been thinking about. Please don't be offended by anything I said. I'm just thinking out loud. Like, and I think that's another thing with the YouTube thing is people, before they make their own videos, they don't realize that literally all people on YouTube are doing is talking. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to kind of viscerally understand that just because like 100 people or 1,000 people or whatever are watching this person, just because they have a platform or whatever, that doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about necessarily any more than anybody else. Like, usually have a lot of incentive to pretend that they know what they're talking about more than they actually do, which is probably, what the Ben Shapiro's and the Jordan Petersons of the world are doing. But, and I think they actually believe their own lie in that case. But anyway, I probably shouldn't name specific names. That's going to get me in trouble, but yeah, I don't know. I've just been thinking about that a lot because I feel both very ignorant and very privileged in the amount of stuff that I do know. You know, it's easy for the educated, the very educated people in the world to lose empathy for people who are not as educated. And if you spend all your time in certain in-groups, you're going to lose the ability to communicate with people who are outside of that group. And I think that's the interesting thing about like a Jordan Peterson, is that he, on the one hand, is very, very much entrenched in the academic in-group. Mia Mulder made a video about this that was really interesting and actually articulate, that I highly recommend. But he retains the ability to speak to and like really get through to people who are not in that group, who are looking to feel more educated than they really are, which sounds awful, but it's just true. And I think that is kind of just worth thinking about, the way that those people are more effective at communicating with certain groups. Boy, that was a ramble. I don't know if, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing with, especially when you're somebody like me on YouTube, it's just kind of a thinking out loud thing. And it's important to me to be honest and upfront about the things that I don't understand, because I really don't want to be a person that people look at as, you know, more intelligent, more worth listening to than I actually am, or take anything I say uncritically, which I guess is how all of the leftists are. But I think, you know, even I am very tempted with some of them to like just take everything they say at face value and be like, yeah, that's true, that's the reality, like that's, you know, and not, I don't know. Anyway, that was a real ramble, and it was wow, 40 minutes. Who's gonna watch that, Mika? Do you think anybody? Anyway, one-way mirrors, I don't know. I'll just post this to my second channel, and anybody who cares can. Sometimes it's a thing where, like, as long as I get the thoughts out, then I can kind of crystallize them better for the next time I talk about them. So I think it's helpful sometimes for me to, you know, just kind of talk. And, yeah, anyway, but, boy, I don't think I'll tag this with any of those people's names that I just mentioned, because that seems like maybe a bad idea. Anyway, hi, how are you? Thank you for watching this. If you're at this 38-minute mark, holy crap, and I didn't edit any of it, I'm predicting, because I don't want to. So, have fun with that. Or I guess you just did have fun with it. You must be really bored. Anyway, so yeah, sorry if that felt like a waste of time. I just do it for myself, you know, bruh. This is gonna take forever to upload too. Oh god. Anyway. Zero people are going to watch this, Cassandra. Please let me know if you actually watch this, and if you actually, like, care enough to watch me talk for 40 goddamn minutes. Anyway, don't take any wooden nickels, you know. Remember who you are and where you come from. One-way mirrors. Things of this nature.